live.
We're now live, are we? Well, hello everybody. We're now about to set out on an adventure because I've never done this before, so we shall have to see how we go on. First thing is the formal bit. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I am obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to view the meeting using the link on the agenda. Right, so that's the first formal bit. We'll take apologies because that's the next thing on the agenda. Apologies, please, Michelle.
We've received apologies from Councillor David Basmar and Councillor Rosemary Dartnell. Councillor Evans and Caroline Bagnall are substituting.
Thank you very much. Shall we note those apologies? You all say aye, so thank you. The next item is the formal item for disclosable pecuniary interest. Members are reminded that they must not participate in the discussion or voting on any matter in which they have a disclosable pecuniary interest and should leave the room prior to the commencement of the debate. So you all are reminded of that. Now, because this is the first meeting of the committee, and many of us have not formally met each other, so I'm going to ask everybody, both members and officers, and in attendance and remotely, wherever they may be, to just introduce themselves and say what their position is. I am Brian Williams. I'm a Conservative member of the administration. My knowledge of audit is that I was the first chairman of the Audit Committee when it was formed in 2006. We didn't have an Audit Committee prior to that. I was the first chairman of the Audit Committee, and I have been either chairman or vice chairman continuously of this committee since that time. I am still learning and I'm still making mistakes for which I will ask your forgiveness in advance. So that's my background is that I was the managing director of my own construction company because I'm a civil engineer by profession. So I have some business interest. We will now move to Simon Harris, the vice chairman. Simon.
Yes, thank you, Brian. I'm new to the Audit Committee. I'm Simon Harris, and I'm one of the members for Cleobury Mortimer, alongside Councillor Gwilym Butler. My background actually is in banking, and over many years I have been subject to and responded to in the internal audit process. And so I do hope that I can bring at least some of that background to contribute to the success of this committee.
Thank you. Nigel Lumley.
I'm a councillor for Albrighton, Conservative councillor, newly elected. For 30 years I was a police officer. In the last 6 years I was the head of audit for quality and compliance. That wasn't internal audit, although I've got a certificate of the Institute of Internal Auditors, and I'm Greenbelt trained in Six Sigma, which is statistical process control. I mainly dealt with performance in relation to key performance indicators and crime recording. And that's me.
Thank you, Nigel. Sounds as though we're going to have a very well trained committee in financial matters. Caroline.
Hello, I'm Caroline Bagnall. I'm the newly elected member for Broseley, and I'm the substitute today for Rosemary Dartnell, who actually is here on the screen behind you. Yeah, this is where the well-trained bit falls apart, because I'm afraid I don't have a background in finance. I was a primary school teacher for many years, yes, so I have a lot to learn, but I'm happy to be here.
We're very happy to have you. Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Roger Evans, former leader of the Liberal Democrat group on Shropshire Council, a backbencher, but a member of the Liberal Democrat group, member for the Longdon division, which is just south of Shrewsbury. Have taken an interest in finance ever since I was first a councillor, and I've been a Shropshire Unitary Councillor since it was first formed in 2009, and was a substitute on this committee for a long time, and I understand have now been made the substantive member, and David Vasma will be becoming the substitute member on this committee. But that paperwork, I think, is still maybe in the throes of being accepted, adopted. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, we're only too happy.
And sorry, and I am a former engineer working in power stations for all my working life.
Thank you. We're very pleased to welcome you as a full member, and indeed David as a substitute. And then I think remotely for today we've got Rosemary Dartnell, who's joining us virtually, and we hope that in future you'll be able to join us here in the room.
She's behind you, Roger. That's just restarting for some reason.
Oh, I see. My screen, I can see it gone blank. So, Rosemary, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm one of 3 members for the Triple Division, Baston Hill, Colham and Sutton, newly elected in May. My background is a split one. I have half my career working in retail and business management for SMEs. And then the second half of my career, I retrained as a geologist, doing that research in geology. So I've got a mind for detail, but not specifically a finance background. But I have obviously been involved in finance from a SME point of view, having been a main board director for many years, and then run small businesses and so on and so forth. So I've got less of a sort of precise background for this job, but hopefully I can bring something to the party.
Sounds to me, Rosemary, as though you have much to offer. You'll be very welcome when you can attend in person. I think we will now move to the officers, and if I can start with James on my left.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm James Walton. I'm the Executive Director of Resources on the Council Section 151 Officer, and I have been since 2013, and I've been involved in the Audit Committee ever since then.
Thank you, James. Kerry?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Head of Audit at Shropshire Council, been in this role for about 11 years. I'm financially trained and roles in the past have been in accounts, finance, audit and improvement programmes. Thank you, Chair.
My dear namesake, Kate Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Katie Williams, Principal Auditor. I'm one of Kerry's deputies. I support Kerry in producing all the information for the committee and answering any questions you have. I spent most of my adult working life in audit, and I've been here nearly 20 years in internal audit.
We've been together a long time, and lovely that you're continuing your career here so happily. Right, the person who's probably more important than anybody, because she records everything that we say, does the minutes and organises the committee. Michelle.
My name is Michelle Dalston. I'm the Committee Officer for Shropshire Council.
Right, that was brief and helpful. No, I can't see the screen because my screen's gone.
Yeah, I'll try and fix it, Brian.
No. So I've no idea who we've got. But we've got Grant Patterson, so presumably, Grant, you tell us what you do to add value to this committee.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Grant Patterson. I'm a director with Grant Thornton, and we are the external auditors to the council. I suppose I am returning to the council, having been rotated off for ethical standard purposes a number of years ago. So I've now enabled me to come back again as the council's engagement lead, responsible for issuing an opinion on the statement of accounts and undertaking value for money work.
Thank you. Kerry's passed me a very helpful note to say that behind me on the screen are Toyin Banadale. Toyin, can you, I can't see you, but please speak if you will.
Thank you, Chair. I am Toyin Bamidele, Interim Director of Strategic Finance. I've been with Shropshire Council for just under 5 months, but I do come along with 21 years experience in working in public sector finance. Thank you, Chair.
And you respond, of course, to James.
Yes, I do. Yes, I report to James.
Thank you. We have Neil Smart.
Stuart, Chair, sorry, that's my writing.
Sorry?
Stuart.
Neil Stewart. Neil Stewart.
Hi, I'm Neil Stewart. I'm the Strategic Management Accountant. I've been with the council 17 years and probably directly involved with the accounts for the last 13 years.
And you respond also to James, presumably?
Indirectly, yes.
Indirectly. Thank you. Two more. Nicola Higgins.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, my name's Nikki Higgins. I'm a strategic financial accountant and deal with helping to produce the financial statements. I've been at the council for probably about 15 years and involved in the accounts from that point onwards.
Thank you. What an experienced team they have. And what finally, another Williams, Sam Williams. Is it Sam?
It is, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Sam Williams. I'm the Interim Assistant Director for Workforce. I also report to James. I've been with the Council for 26 years. I'm here today to present one of the items on the agenda.
Indeed you are. Thank you for joining us.
Brian, we've also got Mary Wren from Grant Thornton.
And apparently we have another member from Grant Thornton, I'm pleased to say, Mary Wren.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Mary Wren, your External Audit Manager from Grant Thornton. I work alongside Grant Patterson and the wider team to deliver your external audit services. As such, I'm in a constant state of excitement about audit, so I'm obviously in the right place.
You certainly are. We're all in a constant state of excitement about this meeting, I can tell you. That is going to go. Right, thank you, Sam. Welcome. So I think that's everybody who's present, either in the room or remotely, and we can now get on to the main business of the agenda. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 4th of March and 20th of May. Well, the difficulty with the 4th of March is I'm the only person left who was here on the 4th of March, so I move the minutes and second them myself. Can we accept those minutes as being accurate if I promised you that they are? All agreed on the minutes of the 4th of March. 20th of May was purely a formal meeting to elect chairman and vice chairman. Somebody move we accept those minutes. Oh dear. Nigel moves, Simon seconds. All agreed? Thank you. We now come to public questions. Are there any?
We've received no public questions.
There are no public questions. Member questions, are there any?
We've received no member questions.
No member questions. So we now come on to the main business of the report. This is where Sam Williams is going to introduce the annual whistleblowing report. Sam, are you there?
I am, Chair. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm here to present and talk you through the annual Speaking Up About Wrongdoing report. So the whistleblowing process provides arrangements to enable employees, elected members, contractors and others to raise concerns about fraud, corruption, adult child protection or harassment and bullying allegations. So this report provides an update to the committee on the number of cases raised regarding council employees over the last year. It does exclude school-based employees, and it also compares this to previous years as well. So the council has in place an effective counter-fraud, bribery and anti-corruption strategy, and the whistleblowing policies contribute to our zero tolerance of fraud, bribery and corruption. Whistleblowing is when a worker reports suspected wrongdoing at work, and officially this is called making a disclosure in the public interest. So section 6 of the report that you have provides more information and background around whistleblowing, and it includes the types of whistleblowing that are eligible for protections known as qualifying disclosures. The whistleblowing policy is available to all staff via the intranet pages, but importantly, it's also available via our website, so that means they can access it from any computer. Important because it allows our staff to access the policy outside of work, where they may be reluctant to be seen to be accessing the policy if they're within the workplace. So moving on to the numbers, so in 2020-21 there were 35 cases reported under the whistleblowing arrangements for the council. As you'll see in the report, the most reported theme was grant fraud, with the outcome of the subsequent audit investigations resulting in 4 cases of grant recovery and other grant fraud reports finding no case to answer. Overall, for the categories of grant fraud, financial and benefit fraud, a total of 7 cases were referred to a third party, which includes the Department for Work and Pensions, Action Fraud and HMRC. So when we compare this to the previous year, there's been a 43% increase in the number of incidents reported. So we had 20 cases in the previous year. But in 2018-19, we had 33 cases, so a similar number. 25 of the cases this last year were reported by email, 7 by phone, and 2 were verbal reports, and 1 was written. The preferred route of blowing the whistle has been via email, which is a change to the previous 2 years, which was by verbal means, which I think is understandable given the COVID-19 pandemic, where an awful lot has moved online and via email. So referring to paragraph 8.2 of the report, in May this year, there was a challenge to our whistleblowing policy and supporting process through an employment tribunal claim. This took place over a 2-week period, and it was a case of Langenhoven versus Shropshire Council. The link is in the report for you to have a look at the full judgment should you wish. But essentially the claimant stated that the council had failed to instigate its whistleblowing policy. However, the tribunal found that the council's policy was actually commended and there was no evidence at all to support the claim, and the claimant did not suffer any detriment as a result of his protected disclosures. So this result confirms that our whistleblowing policy is followed in practice. So in summary then, the speaking up about wrongdoing process forms a key element of the council's corporate governance arrangements and is continuing to be a route for individuals to raise concerns. The policy follows national guidance and best practice as set out in section 6 of the report. And finally, compliance with the policy has been truly tested this year in an employment tribunal and has proved to be strong as detailed in the report. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come back to you, Sam, I'll just see whether any of the other officers. Kerry, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you, Chair.
James, you?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Members? Everybody happy with the report? Well, it's a very reassuring report in that we've had an audit, as you have drawn our attention to in paragraph 8.2, and found that we're fully following our whistleblowing practice. So can I have somebody to move that we approve the report? Caroline moves. Simon seconds. All in agreement? Thank you. Thank you, Sam, very much for that. No need to stay for the, sure you don't want to stay for the next 2.5 hours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Goodbye. Right. We now move to agenda item 7, which is the third line assurance, internal audit annual report. And Kerry is going to introduce this for us.
Thank you, Chair. Members have got in front of them the year-end report, and what this provides you with is details of all the work that we've done throughout the year that's looked at to and assessed to reach my year-end report on the Council's internal controls as required by the public sector internal audit standards and legislation. And we've had good performance in as much as we've covered enough audit work, even with the COVID pandemic, to reach a conclusion. And I can offer limited assurance for the 2021 year about the control framework for governance and risk management and internal controls. There are areas of high and medium risk that have led to the limited opinion. And during COVID, business resources were redirected on dealing with the pandemic, and therefore as many improvements as planned were not made in these areas, hence the reason for that ongoing limited assurance. The full details of which are in the report, and there's just a few things I want to pull out in that. But what members need to be aware of is we have to comply with public sector internal audit standards, and we've done this. We complete self-assessments annually and are externally assessed every 5 years, and that report is part of a later agenda item. But that gives you assurance as to the quality of the audit work that's done, that then leads you to the information that we're providing and that underpins my opinion. In terms of the amount of audits that we've done, we've completed a lot. The details are all in paragraph section 8. What I would say is since the last audit committee, we reviewed and reported on a number of limited and satisfactory assurances, and these appear in paragraph 8.5 of your report. There may be some of these that audit committee wish to action going forwards and request updates from managers in the interim, because what happens from an audit point of view is the point in time we've done our assessment, we will go in and follow up the unsatisfactory areas. Limited areas of high risk we will follow up, but in that period in between, the audit committee might want assurance of improvements directly from managers. So there may be some areas in that paragraph 8.5 that members wish to bring to audit committee in the future. In looking at 8.7, this shows you the trend in internal audit opinions, and the ones again I draw audit committee's attention to is focusing on limited or unsatisfactory assurances that we're giving. What we tend to do is we don't bring the detail of good and reasonable work to yourselves. We do an exception, so the information that we're bringing to you is on an exception basis. And again, paragraph 8.8, the focus I've put you to here is to look at the statistics around significant and fundamental recommendations. So within each audit review that we do, we make recommendations, and there's 4 areas, core scales of recommendation that we do. And again, I wouldn't raise particular points on best practice or requires attention at audit committee. I would bring definitely fundamental every time to you, and where there's a packet of significant that's leading to a low assurance level, I bring those. The details behind these figures are in the appendices. So in terms of fundamental recommendations, I'm looking at paragraph 811 now. They have increased percentage-wise, and there's fundamental recommendations made on various audits, the details of which are in 811. Again, these are areas that audit committee may want to seek in the interim evidence of improvements from those service areas. There's a number around contract and contract management, and there's some in the financial systems as well. During the year, we facilitate work on the National Fraud Initiative, and the results are reported to a later committee, but the focus for committee here is we've done quite a bit on counter fraud work linked with COVID, business grant processes and other grants provided to the organisation to make sure appropriate checks are built in upfront to reduce the risk of fraud, and there's been significant work completed in that area. Although internal audit primarily we look at assurances, we also add value to the council by looking at specific ad hoc pieces of consultancy work, and paragraph 815 has presented those details. So this is where we get involved in things that are either fresh and new to the organisation or projects ongoing, and we can feed in the types of controls that we would be looking at and expecting when we come to do an assurance audit. And on top of the work for Shropshire Council, we also provide work for external clients, and I can report that we've completed all that work and reporting the assurances to that external, those external clients. For committee to note, it's the work of this committee that those externals look to for the performance and quality of audit in gaining assurances that we're delivering a professional audit service. So in terms of my opinion, I've taken a number of considerations into account, all the work that we've done throughout the year, and also the work that we've done to support the pandemic, because as you will be aware, resources were diverted from the original audit plan to support, and there's full details in paragraph 824 in relation to this. But we've supported the business continuity team, the resources directorate in terms of underpinning some of the financial systems, the grant processes, adult services in giving advice around public protection sales and support there. So there's various ways we've been involved. What that's meant is my auditors have been able to bring back information from the council as to how we've responded live to those situations, the controls in place, the assurances we can provide, and all that is fed into my opinion as well. So it's considering all those points, I then offer the assurance that I do, which is limited, the 2021 year. What audit need to be satisfied with as well is that we've hit our performance targets, and we measure in terms of percentage of the revised plan delivered, compliance with public sector internal standards, and our customer satisfaction. And we've hit those targets, which are all outlined for you in 8.23. So in terms of the detail, I think that's as much detail as I was going to go into at this point. So to summarise, regardless of the COVID pandemic, we've been involved enough with the council and the activities to give a level of assurance to the council, and this feeds into the annual governance statement, which is the later report on the Audit Committee's agenda today. And we can demonstrate that we're complying with our SIRs and we've got no areas of significant concern in terms of the way the audit activity is being conducted, and we've not been influenced unduly by any external pressures either. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. Much to think about there. Just one thing that I would like to stress before two things before I bring members in. One is in paragraph 2.2 on the very first page. It almost looks like a slight contradiction when we say final performance has been good, and then further down that there's been a decrease in the higher levels of assurance. The performance of the Audit Committee has been good, but performance across the council, for all the reasons that Kerry has said, has meant that there has been a 7% decrease in the higher levels of assurance by the council. So the council performance has been compromised, mainly by COVID, but the audit performance, final performance of audit, has been good. And in terms of COVID, I'd like to draw your attention to Paris 820 on page 23, and for the next 3 pages or so, right through to page 26, which is all about the effect of COVID on our services. And bearing in mind that this is the report for the year that ended on March the 31st this year, I am concerned for the future that we shouldn't accept COVID as a reason why in future the assurance levels are compromised. It would seem to me that we're going to be living with COVID, or the effects of COVID, for perhaps years to come. And I would hope that officers would adjust to the fact that there is COVID in the community, and that COVID will not be used in future years as a reason for compromise in the levels of assurance and the levels of performance that the various departments of the council do. If you look on page 23, para 822, you will see that we have 6 members of the Audit Committee, or 6 members of the audit staff, sorry, who have been responding to COVID matters. I'd just like to ask Kerry, when do these people return to full-time audit work?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that most of them are returned to full-time audit work. There's just an arm and a leg of a person that's still involved with business grants and some of the work that's still ongoing with that, because obviously that's overlapped as we're just coming out of the COVID restrictions that we've had in the grants associated with that.
Well, it's good to know that at least our audit staff are getting back to normality. Hopefully staff across the council will, during this year, be getting back to normality, and perhaps levels of assurance for this year will prove to be higher, and Kerry can give full assurance rather than limited assurance. Now, I'd like to hear from members. Any questions, any comments? Members? Anybody who wish to? Simon?
Yeah, hope that's clear. It's I've got a couple of things actually. You asked us about what you'd like us to do or you to do about the unsatisfactory audits. Does that mean that we have the opportunity to ask you to go back and...
Excuse me, let me stop. The audit is satisfactory. It's the assurance from the audit that is now limited.
And I fully understand that. I'm talking about the as you've done a series of audits, some of them have come up unsatisfactory. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you. I
You're with that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, fine. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And my question is, are you asking us to say, can you go back in 6 months or a year or more frequently than the normal audit cycle because it was an unsatisfactory audit? Is that the...
There are 2 elements to it. So when we do an audit and it's unsatisfactory, we will timetable and we will automatically go back the next financial year. We'll give the service area enough time to implement the recommendations that they've advised us that they can do, resource that and correct it. The conversation for audit committee members is obviously we won't go back for 12 months. We're going to let the service get on with it. But it might be that you want that assurance straight from the manager. So a manager of that service will be on the ground implementing the project plan, implementing the improvements and hitting milestones throughout those 12 months, that they could come to audit committee and give you that assurance that they're doing that. So you're not waiting 12 months before we redo the audit to give you that, you're getting assurance. And I think that's particularly a benefit to the committee where things are absolutely key to the council delivering its activities.
Thanks, and that leads me into the second question, if I may, Brian, on it's page 26, number 6, the repeat offenders. There's a couple of things on that. Can you identify which audits, presumably they were unsatisfactory audits, but maybe not, where there has been a repeat of it hasn't been sorted out, in which case I would suggest as an audit committee we would like the monthly special report or whatever however you turn it, for that particular area to come back to us? Can you identify those? And secondly, if there is repeat offences, what action's been taken about the, I mean, it's probably not your area, but do you know if there has been any action taken again with regard to the people who can't sort themselves out?
In terms of repeat offenders, yes, we can show where that trend is ongoing. We can highlight those for the audit committee, and we can ask them to report to future audit committees for you. And what I can do is agree that timetable with the chair so that your workload is appropriate for you guys. In terms of escalation, what happens with this information operationally is it goes to the executive directorate, management team and chief executive. So the information that the audit committee receives is no surprise to the business, either those of you that attended the member induction training when we talk about that, their second, third line of assurance. It's no surprise, and those reports that are unsatisfactory and limited, first the owners and managers of those reports get them directly so they're fully aware of it. There's a direction of travel on those reports, so it highlights very clearly if the environment is improving, weakening or staying the same. And so it's very much that escalation process, and as a result of audit committee, I send a report to the executive directorate, which James is a member of, and they have the opportunity then to challenge their staff and officer side of it as well. So there's the two processes: the member challenge through the audit committee and the officer challenge through the executive directorate team.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you for that.
If I can just add to what Kerry has said, over the years, the audit committee has been concerned about repeat offenders, and we have, I know Kerry has given such people, such departments, such actions, extra attention in following years. I think that this last year there's been a bit more latitude, a bit more rope extended because of the COVID situation. People have been able to use the COVID situation to a degree to explain performance which has not been as satisfactory as we would have wished, which back to my original comments that I'm hoping that in future COVID will become far less of an excuse for any underperformance than it has been in this 1 year up to 2021, which was the height of the COVID situation. Any other comments? Yeah, Nigel.
I'd actually highlighted that at 8:20 and then 6, when it was said that there were concerns that someone's actually or repeat offenders and recognising complex. But it goes on then to say, well, we'll look at it once the pressure of COVID recedes, which is what you said earlier, Brian. I don't think we can use COVID as that excuse. And then I'm concerned that if managers are providing the level of assurance, usually the managers, if they're repeat offenders, sometimes are the people that are a stop to correcting the repeat offenders. So you're actually getting assurance from the very people who might be the roadblock.
Would you like to respond to that, Kerry?
Yes. During last year, we did self-assessments for some of those areas that had unsatisfactory and limited assurances. And the reason for that is because they were distracted by other pressures. They knew they hadn't improved the internal control environment. So the benefit of me going in and auditing and sampling something where the business is aware of where they are and they haven't made the improvements. So the question asked of them was, have you made any improvements? Now's your opportunity to say yes or no. And they were very honest and said, no, we haven't. So it was pointless me auditing. So what we did is we took that as a self-assessment. We did do some due diligence checks where they said, well, actually, we've improved on this. We took it as a management assurance that they improved, but I haven't changed my audit opinion because I haven't tested it. So we're aware they're saying their direction of travel is improving in some areas, and that's good for the authority, but that didn't change my assurance. What we're doing is taking that into account when we go out and audit again. So it's a very valid point, and this is why we have to do it independently. Where we did do some due diligence checks where people said they'd improved, we went in and did some testing to verify that, and we would only change our assurance if our independent testing supported that. So it's a pragmatic view given the pressures that the council was under at that point in time.
Could I just the other point on some of the audits is it wasn't possible to go back and repeat the audit because some of the services were closed during the lockdown. So, for example, one of the ones in there, Theatre 7, hasn't been reopened and had enough transactions go through for there to be any new information for us to test to check that they've embedded those control improvements. And one of the earlier points about identifying the repeat offenders on page 36, table 4, we identify the limited and unsatisfactory opinions since the last report, and if we have done an audit of them previously where they were limited or unsatisfactory, we include that information. It's highlighted in the blue text, so because somebody new, you won't have seen those before, so there is a history in the previous reports.
Thank you, Katie. Anybody else? Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm conscious of some discussions that have been had with the Audit Committee in times past, and I see on page 34 the list of unsatisfactory with fundamental recommendations. Some of them seem to be there for more than once, can I put it like that? What I would ask the head of audit to actually concentrate especially on those, because 2 of them I am aware of have actually come along to this committee and been interviewed by previous members of this committee due to the recommendations made by the audit. So I would hope that they do adopt and have adopted the fundamental recommendations, but I would like that assurance, and maybe sometime fairly soon you will be able to give that to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, with all those unsatisfactories, we do go in, we do re-audit them, and we do report that direction of travel to the Audit Committee. The other thing with fundamental recommendations as well, they're the ones we do go back and we do test, and we do make sure that we seek the assurance. And the work we do is on a risk assessed basis, which is why our focus goes back to those unsatisfactory areas, those limited areas, and we tend to focus our resources on those areas. So yes, and there are a couple of areas as well coming up in the work plan where management are coming back to the Audit Committee ongoing on some of those areas as part of the Audit Committee activity. So they'll be coming back to the Audit Committee throughout the year.
Thank you. No?
At 8.8, you've got the chart trending internal audit recommendations. I noticed from 2012 to now that the best practice recommendations have gone down from 23% down to, and bottomed out at 1%. That's not a good trend, is it?
It's an interesting trend, and what's happened is the amount of auditors that we've got within the council has reduced in number. The risk, and if you think we're matching with the high level risk, so the areas we're going into probably are more risky. So best practice, when we give a best practice recommendation, it's about there's no risk to the business, but there may be something they can do in different ways, an added value type of thing. So very much, I think, by the nature of our work, funneling more into the high risk areas, reduced resources, it's naturally moved away from best practice. We don't have the capacity to look at those areas, and there's probably areas of the business that we don't go and look at because the risks are so low on the analysis that we do.
Thank you. If I could address myself to Rosemary Dartnell, who is joining us virtually, if she's still there. Rosemary?
I am still here.
If at any time during the course of our discussions on these papers you would wish to make a comment or ask a question, don't hesitate to do so, because you are virtually somewhere. You are still a very important member of the committee, even though you have been on this occasion been substituted, then we would welcome any comments at any time or any questions that you feel that you would wish to make as a member of the committee, even though substituted today. So I leave that thought with you. Anybody else?
I've got another one.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. 825, the last bullet point, which is about training for your auditors. My experience is that when you've got a dilemma like COVID, the training is the first thing to go. Whilst that talks about a financial commitment for training, how have you actually responded this year? Have you managed to keep up with training requirements?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of training, we've got we're full-time equivalents of 11. There's 2 trainees, one's doing the Institute of Internal Auditors during apprenticeship, and the other one's doing SIPFA. They've managed to keep on track, and they've been doing studies remotely. In terms of keeping the team up to date, which is absolutely key, we have networking through NAFIN, the National Fraud Network, the Local Government Association, SIPFA, IIA, and we've done online webinars and things, and we have lots of updates in terms of how things changed in response to COVID and that. From our institutes, we share that information. So it's been more about those webinars, and we're very much quite an experienced team, so it's about the current risks, the current updates, the current information, sharing that. So it's more informal training than formal qualifications. But it's something that I think is very key, and unless I keep my team up to date and trained in those skills, we're not going to be able to deliver the quality of the audits that you and the customers want. So for me, that is absolute priority. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, well, I think we've had a pretty full discussion on this. If I can say in conclusion that I personally am constantly amazed when you read the report of all that the audit staff have done, how much they achieve with a relatively small team. We've only got, Kerry's only got a team of 11 altogether, and the amount of work that they get through in a year, as demonstrated by this report, is actually absolutely phenomenal, and I am delighted with the way in which the audit staff perform. And in that constant situation, I would like the committee to actually support Kerry in her limited assurance. So my proposed resolution to you is that we endorse the report and that the audit committee support the head of audit in her limited assurance opinion. You got that, Michelle? I do feel that as a committee we ought to let the council know that we support the head of audit's opinion. We're not just accepting it, we actually, as in the basis of this report, support the head of audit in her limited assurance opinion. Was that agreed? Proposed by Roger?
Yeah, I was going to second your.
All right, well, I'll propose it then, you're seconding.
Yeah, I'm going to second it. Yeah.
All in favour?
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that. That's agenda item 7. We now move to agenda item 8, third line assurance, annual review of internal audit, quality assurance and improvement programme. Quake, what a lovely quack. That's on page 47, and this is James's report. James, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme is undertaken on a regular basis. So this is to ensure that the internal audit team are complying with the internal audit standards. So there's 2 main elements to this. There's a self-assessment which is undertaken on an annual basis, and that self-assessment is attached in the appendix. And there are a couple of areas that I'll just run through in relation to that: partial compliance with the standards, The other element to the report is that on a regular basis, every 5 years, we need to undertake a formal external assessment. So the last formal external assessment was undertaken about 4 years ago, so we're now due to have the next assessment completed. So that assessment, that previous external assessment, demonstrated that internal audit were compliant with the standards, and the self-assessment since have demonstrated also compliance with the standards. So in section 8, we identify the main areas where we believe that there is some partial compliance. So although I'm going to focus on these areas, the point is that within the self-assessment at the back, the vast majority of the issues are complied with, which is why we understand that. So the first item is the Code of Ethics and the Objectivity Standard. And here we're just really being clear that there will be work undertaken by internal auditors that may be involved within the work of the business as we're working through. So therefore, if you have any involvement in the business, and that's been demonstrated in the previous report and the work that Kerry talked about in relation to responding to the COVID pandemic, if auditors are involved in that work, then obviously you don't have the independence to then go in and review that work. So what happens on a practical basis is a different auditor will ensure that any work that is done is done to anybody involved in the work, but nevertheless there is not that complete independence, and therefore just for transparency we identify that as partial conformance. The second item of partial compliance is really around the role of the Audit Committee and the ability for the Audit Committee to make key decisions. So examples of this are around setting the internal audit budget and the resources plan, and also the appointment and or removal of the chief internal, the head of internal audit, chief internal auditor, Kerry, just to be clear. So with that, those responsibilities fall to me as the Section 151 officer, and although all of that information will be transparently reported through to the Audit Committee, the actual decisions about how the budget is set, the level of resources within the internal audit team, and the ultimate appointment or removal of the head of internal audit does fall to the Section 151 officer. So on that basis, we again are identifying partial compliance. The appendix demonstrates, as I say, all of the areas of the standards, where that compliance is, the evidence and reasoning for that behind. So I'm happy to take any questions on the back of that. So I'll leave the introduction there. Thank you.
Any questions, or everybody happy? If you will look at para 712 on page 52, we are asked to endorse the decision to go out to market for quotations from an external assessor. I personally feel that the only way in which our 5-year review can be carried out with total satisfaction of independence is to have it done by an external assessor. So I'm more than happy to go with this decision. So as a committee, we're asked to endorse the decision. So shall we accept the resolve to accept the report and endorse the decision to go to market for quotations from an external assessor? Everybody agreed? Proposed, Nigel, seconded, Roger, and agreed. Thank you very much. We now move to item 9. Turn my agenda over. Annual governance statement. Now this is probably, almost certainly the most important statement that we have to consider and endorse during the year. And hopefully at the end we shall resolve to approve the annual governance statement. But James is going to take us through it. James.
Thank you, Chair. So just to give a brief introduction to this, and I have to take any questions as we work through it. So the annual governance statement, as the Chair said, is a very important document produced every year that sits alongside the annual statement of accounts. So within that annual governance statement, it looks at the overarching governance arrangements, considerations, internal control, environment, etc. across the entire authority, and pulls that together in a single statement, which is then signed by the Chief Executive and the leader. So although myself, and particularly Kerry, are incredibly involved in pulling together this document, ultimately it sits with the Chief Executive and the leader to sign that off. The framework identifies a number of areas that are considered on in Appendix A, and those are broken down into a number of areas, all of which are considered and evidence provided on the back of the considerations of each of those areas. There is a copy of the actual statement attached. There is also a second appendix which shows the Code of Corporate Governance, attached to Appendix B, which demonstrates the way in which the authority works in general. And then the Appendix C then covers off the actual action plan for the 1920 financial year. So the statement is looking forward in some senses in terms of what are the elements that need to be completed based on the risks and considerations identified at this point in time. So it looks forward and sets an action plan for that, but at the same time, the action plan that was presented at this time last year, there is then a review of all of the actions undertaken in relation to the completion of those issues. And with a strong annual governance statement, but more importantly an accurate annual governance statement, this then provides information to, for example, external audit when they review the overall statement of accounts, and it gives a consideration of just exactly the state of the organisation and how that is working and how those governance and control arrangements are in place. I don't intend to go through the statement in detail. The evidence is there, the responses are there. Just to say, those responses, as I said, a lot of work, particularly for Kerry, in pulling this together. They have been produced by all of the senior officers right the way across the local authority. So in all of the directorates, we ask senior officers to complete a statement each, and their statement is pulled together from their own individual senior officers, so that we get a really good understanding of the way in which the local authorities work. I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
You want to add anything, Kerry?
No, thank you, Chair.
Covers things pretty comprehensively. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 84, significant governance issues. I wonder if there's any update could be given on that, because looking at the audit and the future programme for the council, I think we have a duty to ensure there are sufficient resources to deliver what the council has decided to do. And I see that there is a structural funding gap reported. Not much information coming from government at present, but is there any update that can be given on that, really the future of how it's going to be tackled?
Yeah, so if I can, Chair, clearly the funding situation is a key issue for the local authority at this point in time. The last financial year clearly was dominated by the impact of the pandemic, and significant government funding was provided over the year to ensure that the budget could be brought into balance by the end of the year. Now, as we worked through that year, funding became available in various different tranches and with different timescales and different conditions relating to it as the year progressed. So it was very difficult to plan exactly whether there would be sufficient funding when we actually didn't know what the impact of COVID-19 would be on a financial basis, certainly earlier on in the year. The reason I mention that is because going into the next financial year, into the year we're currently in, clearly COVID and the pandemic haven't gone away. There are changes that are being made, but all the time there is this need to continually balance our overall position. So funding has been provided this year from the government, additional COVID-19 funding, and that will help to manage this year, but we are still very early in the financial year to understand exactly how that works out. When we look then forward into the 22-23 financial year, again, will COVID be an issue or not? Exactly what will that mean, and what will the government funding in relation to that be? The bigger picture was in relation to fair funding, and the original timetable was that fair funding would have been in place, I think, 2 years ago. That's been delayed and won't be now in place for the 22-23 financial year. So we're looking to see another replication of the current year's position. So if that happens, and one-off funding provided in this year continues into next year, which is the expectation and the kind of the default position, then that funding gap reduces, and we start again from a kind of the problems aren't solved in terms of the national funding position, but at least they're not any worse, and therefore we continue to manage within that boundary. So it is a significant risk. It's not gone away. At the moment, it's too early to identify exactly what the implications will be for 22-23, but we are currently working through a budget planning process, which will see a budget set, or at least the outline of that budget set by December this year.
Thank you. Anything else from anybody? Well, if I can draw your attention particularly to page 63, para 7.2. And this is the actual backbone, the whole framework of the annual governance statement and what we are looking at. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points there, and I've been through this governance statement and the various appendices, A, B, C, D, etc., as indeed I'm sure you have. And it does seem to me that as a committee, we have been able in this report to consider the governance of the council during the year 2020-21. We are reporting back to the council on this annual governance statement. That's our role, to report to the council. And I am happy to move that we resolve to approve the annual governance statement as a committee. Anybody wish to second that? Roger will second that. So I move and second that we approve the annual governance statement as set out in full detail before us. All agreed? Thank you very much. None against. So that deals with the annual governance statement. We now move to item 10, the annual assurance report of the Audit Committee, which is on pages 111 to 128. Annual assurance report. And James is going to introduce this again. Or James is again going to introduce this report.
Yes, I'll introduce it for the first time. Thank you, Brian, and apologies for hearing my voice quite a few times. So there's still a few reports to go that I'll be picking up. So this is the annual assurance report to full council. So this is due to go later in the year, and this is basically Audit Committee's opportunity to identify all the work that's been undertaken over the last year, and to provide assurance to full council that the role that's being undertaken by Audit Committee, that the remit, the terms and conditions have been met, and all of the requirements that are necessary are there. This allows full council to then gain assurance in the workings of the local authority via the work undertaken by Audit Committee. Just to clarify, in terms of section 3, where we have the decisions, there is the recommendations to the Audit Committee, which is set out there in 3.1. 3.2 is then the recommendations to council. This is just for transparency, so you can see then what the recommendation to full council will be. It's effectively the same report will go through. In the appendix, we have that draft annual assurance report, which takes you through, as I say, the work of the last year, and really just provides a lot of information there in terms of what was done, how it was undertaken, what meetings were held, what issues were considered, and what that overall assurance piece is. It picks up a number of recommendations and areas that Audit Committee added significant value to for the local authority as a whole, and gives really, as I say, the full council the assurance that the work has been undertaken at Audit Committee is fulfilling its remit. There is an opportunity for Audit Committee to amend and consider that report, or to highlight further areas if there is a feeling that should be done. Clearly, with new members on the committee, it's a little more difficult to do that than in previous years, but nevertheless, even as a reference document for Audit Committee to review, I think it's a really helpful piece of work. But I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, if you have read through the report, as I know you have, it again indicates the breadth of the responsibilities of the audit staff, and indeed of the Audit Committee. The statements which really start summary on page 120, the summary of assurance reports received, show what we heard during the last year, of which sadly none of you were at that time present, because you've only been elected. Sorry, Roger, I beg your pardon. Yeah. I was thinking of again of David Basner being a member rather than yourself, of which only Roger and I will be aware. During the course of this year, as equivalent reports come to us, you will begin to appreciate even more fully than you may do now just the breadth of the work that audit do. I'm pleased to invite any comments that any of you may have on this report. Simon.
Yeah. I guess this is to James. James, it's possibly my ignorance. Page 122, about the highways maintenance contract. Can you just flush out that very last sentence, given the size of the contract, impact on key council services, and that the control improvements have not greatly impacted on the insurance level? What are we trying to say there?
I don't know whether Kerry wants to pick up on this, but I think the main point there is that the overall control environment for the local authority is not impacted on by a particular reporting within a particular service area. So it's there's a number of things a number of audits that would be undertaken. So an example in previous years would have been where we review, say, ICT contract, and obviously ICT underpins an enormous part of the local authority. So if there are recommendations that are made within that would have a much wider impact on the council as a whole. But with the highways itself, it's much more of a service issue, and therefore it's less of a concern in a sense in terms of that wider assurance framework. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
It's probably worth adding that where we were last year, we completed the annual governance statement, and then that there were reports on the highways. Sorry.
Is that it, Roger? Yeah.
Thank you. We completed the annual governance statement, there were reports on the highways maintenance contract, and at the timing of the annual governance statement, we closed it down and not made specific mention of this contract. And as we went through the process, we revisited the AGS. So like today, there was something that we haven't put in, we can revisit the AGS, and that's just reflecting as part of this meeting this time last year. We revisited it and made specific reference to the contract to highlight that there were issues. It was a key contract, but it didn't impact on the financial records. So that's the history behind that.
Any other points? Everybody happy? You will see that on page 115, I have to make a statement to the council. I don't want to be proposing to read it out to the council. I say I never realised after I'd written this report how lucid I am. I'd like to particularly draw your attention yet again. I know you may think I'm being a bit psychopathic, whatever the expression is, about the audit service staff, how well they perform, and particularly we couldn't, as a committee, try to be as effective as we intend to be over this coming year without the backing and the comprehensive nature of the reports we receive and the training which the audit staff carry out for us. So that statement is, I hope you will agree with, and let us approve the annual assurance report and forward it to council. Can I have a motion to that effect, that we approve the report and forward it to council? Simon? Caroline? Agreed? Okay, that's item 10 disposed of. Financial outturn report, item 11, pages 129 to 123, a lengthy report. And again, we fall back on James's expertise. Sorry, Simon.
Sorry, this is a bit technical. Which of the packs are we working off now? The initial one that we got?
This is still the initial.
Still the initial. Do tell me when we flip to your new one. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I think
all night that has.
We're all a bit confused and not in the dark, at least struggling a little bit to understand the most recent emails you sent out about these. So we're hanging on every word that you're going to tell us now, James.
As always, Chair. Thank you. I will. If I introduce the financial outturn report. So yes, this was in the original pack. So this report it could be considered one of the most popular reports for the council, as it seems to go everywhere. So it has already been to Cabinet, it has already been to Performance Management Scrutiny Committee, and it has already been to full council. So why is it coming to Audit Committee may well be your question. Normally it would come to Audit Committee before it goes to full council. However, because of the arrangements that have been made around signing off the council's accounts, we now have an Audit Committee late in July to ensure that the statement of accounts can be signed off, and council tends to fall earlier in the month simply because of things like school holidays, etc. So unfortunately we will have this timing issue going forward. So the financial outturn report, the reason it's coming to Audit Committee in particular is because it allows the Audit Committee to consider and review the actual controllable expenditure and income collection for the authority as a whole before we get into the technicalities of the statement of accounts. So in the sense that the financial outturn is a much more user-friendly kind of review of the financial revenue financial state of the council and the capital programme before, as I say, we go into the detail of the statement of accounts. So I won't go through it in great detail. We delivered an underspend at the end of the year, and I'll refer back to the points I made earlier in relation to Councillor Evans' question around the management of the budget over the 2021 financial year. We did deliver an underspend. We did deliver 3/4 or 2/3, I should say, of the savings proposals that were undertaken. There were a number of grants that came through throughout the year to help manage that additional expenditure, and we have rolled forward a number of those pressures that have been identified in the year, and rolled forward grants and often through reserves through into the current financial year. to enable us to manage those ongoing trends. I won't go through the performance in detail because the performance has been considered at the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee. I will just take you to paragraph section 9 on page 138 and 139, which demonstrates that in table 12, which is towards the bottom of page 139, the general fund balance. So this is an assessed balance that's undertaken every year. We risk assess what that balance should be based on a whole series of criteria that is approved by council in February. That assessment at the moment suggests that our balance should be around about 15.5 million, and you can see that as at the 5th of March 2021, with a number of ins and outs over the year, we are just over 14 million. So that would put us around about £1.5 million below our risk assessed target. That's not ideal, but nevertheless, it's not giving us sleepless nights, given that there is a significant amount of funding there, and because we delivered an underspend, that really is the kind of the measure of our financial stability. We've delivered underspends in I think 5 of the last 6 financial years. So as long as that continues, we should have resilience outside of the need to step into the general fund balance. I'll leave it there, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Roger.
Thanks, Chairman. Not a question, it's a comment really, especially for new members. On page 2 of this report, or page 130 of the papers, under recommendations that went to council, under F, it does show this level of school balances increased dramatically during the year in question. Can I just say that that was a one-off due to grants that have been given to schools? It is not a surplus that's there in schools normally, and the anticipation is that that will all disappear in this current year because of the COVID and the other things. So it is an abnormal amount, and it is a one-off. It isn't schools are now, I use the word well paid, but they, as flush, receive the money that they need. They would still argue they need more money, but that is a one-off because of the pandemic.
If I can, Chair, if I just quickly add to that, the balance in 2019-20 was also actually depressed because of the dedicated schools grant deficit that had to be shown within those figures previously. So it appears that school balances have grown significantly from just under 2 to almost 6. The under 2 in 2020 is a depressed figure, and then, as Councillor Evans has said, there's then additional funding on it and carried forward. So it is quite an unusual picture there. We wouldn't normally see that level of variance from one year to the next.
Thank you, Roger. That's a good point, well made. Any other questions, queries, comments? Well, it's already been to council and been approved by council, so we could scarcely do other than approve the report. Is it moved and seconded that the report be accepted and approved? Roger moves. Simon seconds, and I'm sure we all agree. Thank you. Now, I think I'm going to use my discretion to adjourn the committee for 5 minutes so we can stretch our legs before we go on to the remainder of the agenda. So it is now 20 past, and we will resume at 25 past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
You mean after all these years you haven't got a name slate?
I know.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, the senior members of
James didn't send us the update.
I'm unique.
yes, you get a personal one.
received a note from David Bagnall?
Thank you, Chair.
Right, members, we are live again. And we are now moving on to grab my agenda with I think Item 13, external.
Item 12.
Item 12, sorry, yes, we haven't approved the draft statement of accounts. We've had the financial outturn. We seem to have approved a lot of things today, but we haven't yet approved the draft statement of accounts, which is pages 195 to 205. 195 to 205. Sorry, James again, I guess.
Yeah. Right, so this is where I'll just do a little bit of an introduction to where things get a little bit complicated. Just in terms of logistics, sorry, I apologise in advance, but I will try and take you through this. So the first thing to start with is, while in the original pack, absolutely, Chair, this was pages 195 to 206, we are now moving to the new pack, which was emailed out to you yesterday. So this is the new pack of 226 pages. The first part of that pack is a revised covering report. So I'll go through that in just a second. The second part is then a revised analytical review. I will go through that. And then we have the statement of accounts, which you have not seen previously, and was only, it was only sent out last night. So firstly, just to explain where we are and why you've received all these papers in the way that you have. So in undertaking the closure of the accounts this year, we were able to take a slightly longer period of time than the faster close down approach which had been brought in previous years, and this was in relation to the COVID pandemic and the need for people to be working from home, working remotely, etc. So whereas a couple of years ago we were closing the accounts by the end of May, I would sign the accounts off, an audit committee would then consider them in June, and then external audit would be coming in and looking at it over the June and July period, and by the end of July we would have signed off audited set of accounts. That went out the window last year over the pandemic period, and the deadlines would change significantly. So last year the accounts could be closed and signed off by the end of August, and then formally audited and completed by the end of November, so a significantly longer period of time. This year, those deadlines have been shifted again. Now we have until the end of July to sign off the draft statement of accounts, and then the audit will be completed by the end of September. So over this period, slightly less time than we had last year, but the plan was to produce the accounts, draft statement of accounts by the end of July, and we've been able to do that, which is what's been sent out to you. However, there were a number of significant pieces of work and a number of areas that delayed that work over the last few months. The biggest one of those related to the valuation of our property plant and equipment. So the PPE valuations are very important in relation to the balance sheet for the statement of accounts. That work has been undertaken. A number of delays and issues with that meant that we only received that final information literally in the last week. So that has been incorporated into the statement of accounts. In addition, there was some final valuations work undertaken in relation to the pension fund. So the pension fund accounts go separately to the pensions committee. Nevertheless, they are incorporated within the council's accounts. And without going into detail, the valuation changed significantly in relation to one particular area of the pension fund investments, simply because of a later valuation becoming available. That later valuation in one particular area was, I think it was £45 million different to the valuation that had gone into the draft. So therefore, that adjustment had to be made before the accounts were signed off, because otherwise it would have been a material misstatement within the accounts that the external audit would have picked up, and I don't want to have a set of qualified accounts. So effectively, up until literally yesterday, the day before, we were still trying to get all of those accounts finalised. Hence, we couldn't send the accounts out to you until yesterday, which is unfortunate. And clearly, receiving a 226-page document the day before committee is not acceptable in terms of enabling Audit Committee to review and consider that report. So, what we've done in mitigation to that, so we've revised the covering report, that's the first 6 pages of the revised pack. So we've revised that now to take into account the latest position. We have then revised the analytical review. So the analytical review for new members is a review of the accounts, basically comparing it to the previous year and identifying where those key significant variations are, variations above a certain percentage or a certain value, and then within those, we give some explanation as to why those changes have been made and what the reasoning is behind that. That just allows a better understanding of the accounts, and that's your starting point, really. When you see figures significantly change from one year to the next, why has that happened would be the obvious question. So we've updated that. So the statement of accounts is also attached. I'm not going to go through that report in detail, but I will hand over to Toyin, and as been introduced already, Neil and Nikki from the finance team who report through to Toyin are both here. So I'll ask Toyin just to very briefly take you through the report, through the analytical review and through the statement of accounts. I think if we spend a little bit more time actually taking members through that so you understand what those statements are, the plan then is that clearly you're not really going to be able to form an opinion very quickly in relation to that. So what we're suggesting is that over the next couple of weeks, if any members do have time to consider the revised report, if they do have any questions, they do have any comments, then they can email those through to myself or to Toyin, and we can then consider those and make responses as necessary. So unfortunately, because of the timescales, because of the way this is fallen, despite the fact we put the audit committee as late as we possibly could within July, we still only managed to get that report out the day before. So I'll apologise for that, and I'll apologise for the complicated logistics of trying to go through this, but hopefully that explains where we are. So before I hand over to Toyin, I just ask, are there any questions, or is there anything that anybody needs explaining further in relation to that process?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. Are we? Can you give me the page numbers that you're referring to as to what is new and what you'd like our thoughts on in the next couple of weeks?
Okay. So in relation to what's new, obviously the entire statement of accounts you've not seen that previously. So the bulk pages 17 to pages 224 of the new pack is entirely new information. So that will be the main part of where you want to look. In terms of the analytical review, which is pages 7 to 16 of the revised pack, an original analytical review was produced. That was based on the balance sheet at the moment. It didn't include things like the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So the balance sheet element you've seen. However, where there were any changes in relation to that have been made in the last week, those figures will change. So what I would suggest is, if you look at the analytical review, pages 7 to 16, and identify any concerns you have or questions you have that are not referenced or dealt with in the explanations below each of those variances, then concentrate on that. And then the statements of accounts, fundamentally the statement of accounts is made up of the narrative, the key statements, so the balance sheet, the income expenditure account, the cash flow statement, the movement in the reserves, etc. And then there are a series of notes behind that. So those notes try to provide more explanation around that. So any questions that you may have in looking at those individual statements, there will be notes in there that then will provide more information. The pension fund account is in there. That makes up a significant proportion of that. That will be reviewed by the pensions committee. So by all means, look at that and ask any questions that you have on that. But really, there is a separate route by which that will be considered in greater detail than by audit committee. So if that helps reduce the workload a little bit, then by all means take that route.
Thank you, James. Such is the dedication of the members of the Audit Committee that I'm sure we shall all be cancelling our holidays in order to give adequate attention to the papers you have placed before us.
I am sure.
Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I listened to what a finance officer's got to say in a few minutes, but I do note that section 3 is still blank. I presume that's in my copy anyway, which is the auditor's statement. So I presume that will be following through. Is there any timescale for that? Because obviously that's part of it. I've got some other questions on it, but I'll leave those till after we've heard a little bit more about it. I did have a fairly rapid browse through it quickly, as is my want, but I'll bring up those if needed in a few minutes' time. But that section 3 I did note, and
yes,
it is a strategic. I presume that will be coming through sometime, but
yes.
When?
Yeah, it was remiss of me not to explain that. So when the draft statement of accounts is produced and signed off by the Section 151 officer by the 31st of July, that then is passed over to Grant Thornton. It's published on the website, passed over to Grant Thornton, who then undertake their audit certification work. And that work takes place between basically the 1st of August and the 30th of September. So by the 30th of September, we will then have the audit opinion and certificate. So that part of the accounts is never ready at the point at which it's signed off. By the 30th of September, we will then have that audit opinion and certificate provided. That's the plan that we would work to, and then that enables us, as I say, to meet that deadline on the 30th of September for the final accounts. Does that explain?
If I can, Chairman, council is on the 23rd of September, so will it be going to council? Will it come here, or will there be a need of a special meeting? I'm not sure of the timescale before it goes to council for them. Will it be going to council on the 23rd of September? Is that the plan?
Yeah, so the plan would be that it would be going to council on the 23rd, and when Grant Patterson or Mary Wren comes in later, we can talk about that in a bit more detail. But the plan would be that by the 23rd of September, we will have the statement of accounts will go to be signed off by full council. If there are still some minor adjustments, then there will be a delegation built in to enable the final certificate and the accounts to be signed off following that, which will be in negotiation and discussion between myself and Grant Thornton. But yes, it would go to council for consideration. I don't think, I'm just looking to Kerry, I don't think we've got an audit committee between now.
No, we've got training on Friday the 10th of September.
Yeah.
We could have a look at this.
So if you wanted to have another look, then we can certainly facilitate that, but we won't necessarily have had all of the external audit considerations by then. But yeah, we can certainly build something in around that where we have.
Oh, we've got audit committee. Oh, sorry, I apologise. We've got audit committee on the 16th of September.
Okay, in that case, we can take it then.
Yeah, right. Yes, Roger, thanks for that point. Yes, we can. That will be on the agenda for our committee on the 16th of September. Thank you. But we better hear Toyin now. Toyin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I pressed my mute twice. Thank you, Chair. And as previously mentioned by James, the cover note has been updated, and we do have the analytical review appended to that. So if I take you through that very quickly before I then hand you over to Nikki and Neil to take us through the statement of account. So with the analytical review, we're looking at areas where we've got variances over 8 million, or if it's over 10% compared to last year. So we compare previous years with this year. So I'll look very quickly through this. I'll try not to read through everything, but just look at the key areas we want to look at. Within the comprehensive income and expenditure statements on adult services, we've had an increase on the expenditure, as well as a 12% increase on the income. This is mainly as a result of the COVID-19 grants. So we got a lot of grants from government as a result of COVID. We also got a lot of expenditure as well. This includes public health grants as well, which is part of the response to COVID-19. No major pressures in there, but we're glad we actually got the grant to fund the pressure from COVID. The next one is on the local authorities housing. Here we've got a decrease in the expenditure, and this is mainly as a result of the revaluation gain in 2020 compared to 1920. The next one where we've got a major movement as well is on legal and democratic services. Here we've got a 62% decrease on expenditure and an 88% decrease on income as well. Within the legal and democratic services, both income and expenditure has decreased, and this is compared to last year, mainly as a result of we've got corresponding income as well in relation to general and European elections. So because of COVID, we didn't actually spend as much as we did in previous year, and we spent less on European election as well compared to the previous year. Now, looking at the expenditure for place directorates, there's been a reduction of 14% on the income. This is due to reduction in income from car parks, leisure centres. As a result of COVID pandemic, we had and the lockdown, so we had to shut down a lot of these venues, which we couldn't actually get income in. So there was a massive reduction in our car parking income. Leisure centres were all closed as a result of that. And although we got some grant from government, which was very helpful to fund this, so we spent about 3.4 million was allocated to place income to replace this loss of income as a result of COVID. Within workforce and transformation, we also had a reduction in expenditure, but an increase in our income. So the reduction in expenditure was as a result of project costs, which is specifically in the IT projects, such as ERP projects and the social care project, following the implementation of a new system. So we introduced a new system, and then which has actually helped reduce the cost. The main reason for the increase in income was the receipt of COVID-19. So we got some grants in there as well from government to support this, which is for the essential supplies of grant. On the corporate side, within the CIES, the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, we've got an increase. We had an increase in our expenditure as well, which 161% increase, and in the income we had 270% increase. The income mainly as a result of additional grant from government. This is a discretionary business grant from central government, which has actually helped to fund support for businesses as well. So the expenditure within the corporate services also increased as a result of COVID, and but we had the corresponding income to fund that, which did help the bottom line. And then moving swiftly into the other operating expenses, the main reason for the decrease was actually related to losses in disposal of non-current assets. And in 1920, the council had 3 schools transferred to academy, but this year we only had 1 school, and of that 1 school was only partly owned by the council, meaning we had about 43% reduction in our income from operating expenses. And coming to financing and investment income and expenditure, there was an increase of 10% in here, and this was mainly as a result of investment in properties and changes in their fair values, which has actually increased from a loss of 2.62 million in 1920 to a gain of 1.05 million in 2021. The net income from investment properties has also increased by just under $1 million to 1.5 million, from just under $1 million to 1.5 million, which is reflecting the acquisition of new investment properties, and the movement in valuation, which has also gone from the movement sorry, I need to say that again. The movement in revaluation has actually gone from 3.5 million loss in 1920 into a 0.72 loss in 2021, which relates to specific movement in value of assets in this category, and it's reflecting the assets in this category at the balance sheet date and the evaluation. So this is as at the 31st of March 2021. So non-specific, the taxation and non-specific grants, we've got an increase in there on the income as well, which is mainly income from non-domestic rates, and it has increased from 19.7 million. Sorry, it's increased by 19.7 million in 2021. This is mainly due to awarding of expanded retail, nursery and newspaper release by central government. So the impact of these is that less rates are available for collection in 2021, and central government reimbursed local authorities for this via Section 31 grant, so which is included within this ring fence grant anyway. So None of the ring fence grants has been increased. Sorry. Apologies for that. So also our non-ring fence grant has also increased by 28 million due to Section 31 grants in relation to expanded business rates relief and non-ring fence COVID grants such as the airlay support. So we got over 28 million of COVID grant from government to passport to businesses in the year, which is why that has actually increased in there. We had the 9% increase. On surplus or deficit on revaluation of properties, plants and equipment assets, we've had an increase of 247% compared to the previous year. And this figure is as a result of an upward or down. We actually, when we do the analysis of the surplus or deficit on revaluation of properties and plants and equipment, this looks at the upward or downward revaluation, and this is being debited or credited directly to the revaluation reserve. So rather than to the service revenue account. So this does not impact the revenue account, but in 1920 the surplus was 93 million, but in 2021 this was actually a loss of 137 million. So this was mainly as a result of significant decrease in the assets on which a revaluation gain was recognized in 2021, and a significant increase in our assets on which a revaluation loss was recognized. Now, moving swiftly into the revaluation reserves, we've had an increase. This is mainly as a result of impairment losses, and we've charged directly to the revaluation reserves, an increase of 281,000 in 2021 in relation to last year. We didn't have any last year, so that's a 100% increase in 2021. Moving swiftly to the remeasurement of the net defined benefit liability. We've had an increase of 180% here, and this has actually changed from a gain of 28 million in 1920 to a loss of 22 million in 2021. The total swing of 50 million is actually due to a change in liabilities as a result of a change in financial assumptions used by the actuaries. So we had a change in assumption, which has actually caused the difference, the movement between the years. So this has resulted in a loss of 170 million in 2021 compared to the gain in 1920 of 80 million. Now that's all on the comprehensive income and expenditure accounts. If we move into the balance sheets, on our property, plant and equipment, we've actually had a decrease of about 14 million within our property, plant and equipment. And I think, like James mentioned earlier, this was mainly as a result of the revaluation. We've had the revaluation that's actually changed. The method used this year has changed, which has impacted. And this is not local to, it's actually not just at Shropshire. This is a global thing, and both private sectors and public sectors are having problems with the evaluation as well because of the COVID. Unfortunately, we have to keep referring to COVID, but because of COVID, the properties valuation have actually changed, and also we've changed our methodology as well to make sure we actually is in line with as prepared, as planned. So overall, we've had a 14% reduction on PPE in our property, plant and equipment. Coming to investment properties, this has actually increased by 24%, and this increase of, we've had increase of 11 million within investment properties by 2021, which is mainly as a result of addition to new investment properties in terms of acquisition of the Pride Hill Shopping Centre and the Gap site and former Morrison Shopping Centre. So in our intangible assets, we've got a reduction of 13%. And sorry, just need to drink some water in here. Sorry.
We'll all take on water.
So in our intangible assets, we've got 13% reduction within our intangible assets. And when we talk about intangible assets, this is about our short-term assets, and the annual amortization charge leads to a significant reduction in the net book annually. So therefore, the reduction in the balance sheet value of intangible assets of 2021 reflects the reduction in expenditure under the digital transformation program, which has resulted in a higher level of expenditure on intangible assets in previous years. Our long-term investment has also decreased by 98%. In 2021, the onshoring of the shopping centre required the assets that were previously accounted for as long-term investment to be transferred to PPE. So which is why we've got the reduction here, because that has actually moved to PPE, creditors and debtors. Within our long-term debtors, we've got an increase of 14%, and the increase in long-term debtor is due to a net drawdown of 3 million, roughly 3 million, from the loan facilities by the by Konovi, which is a Hamzan business company. The balance sheet on the current assets of sale investment properties. In 1920, one investment property fell into the category of current asset being held in investment properties based on the agreement to sell the site at year-end. So this disposal did not complete in 1920 as expected, but this is still expected to be completed in 2021, and which is why it's now within this and is reduced the amount based on the new agreement now in place. So assets held for sale. The balance sheet value is reduced by 75%, and this is mainly as a result of disposing of assets and whether they meet the criteria to be classified as asset held in for sale at the balance sheet date, which is at 31st of March. Sorry. And inventory, our inventory has gone up by 22%, mainly as a result of increase in salt stock. So we had less use of the salt in the year. And sorry, I feel a bit lightheaded.
Would you, Toyin, would you like us to, you've covered a fair bit of ground now. If members are like me, we're beginning to find it slightly difficult to take it all in. I think we've reached a stage now where we would like to study the accounts, bearing in mind what you've already told us about them. And this will give us then the opportunity to, at our next meeting, to ask questions of you. You've given us so much information that we're beginning to reach the stage of overload, I have a feeling. So we can spare you further with your cough, and I can fully understand that. And we will hope that you will be with us, I'm sure you will, at our next meeting when we've all had a chance to read these papers and can come back to you. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. I actually, yeah, that's very fine. Thank you. I do feel unwell, so I will have to be leaving the meeting. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for the very comprehensive report so far. Now, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I've only read it through fairly quickly, so they may be very simplistic, very simplistic comments in the. But I notice in the revised statement of accounts, it says that the dedicated school grant deficit 2.25 million in unusable reserve. Do not understand what that means. And then on the next page.
Well, just I'll get that.
Okay.
And then come back to you. James, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Nikki or Neil to come in and respond to that. If we're going into the detail of the statement of accounts.
Well, written can do if you want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, Chair, if Councillor Evans wants to go through his questions, and then we'll go through any answers.
Okay.
With,
I thought you might be able to answer that one off the cuff.
I think if we hear them all, then we'll get Nikki and Neil can then consolidate and identify which ones they can respond to straight away.
It was a compliment to your normal comprehensive ability to answer questions, Jay. Right, all your questions then.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, on page 3 of the revised report, it says that the authority's equity amounts to 199 million in round figures, a decrease of 202 million pound in assets, which is a lot. What I picked up from Tonya was a little bit, I think, of maybe transfer, so a little bit about that. I note the press release issued yesterday about the shopping centres and the revaluation on that. In the report, I see on page 72, it says Shrewsbury Retail Trusts, and there's two amounts there mentioned of for 2020-21 of 3.4 million, and then over the page, revaluation of a figure of 8.5 million, which is different to what the press release says, and I'm not really understanding that. And I can't see anything in the report where it says anything about any contributions we've made to relocation costs from the Pride Hill Centre, and also any cost of refurbishment in the Darwin Shopping Centre. So although we paid £53 million for it, there has been money spent. From what I see, there's been a net income of just over 500,000 from those shopping centres, but there's obviously been some expenditure, and I can't pick up the expenditure from within the report. I'd like to see if that could be there, and anything else I can send through by email, because it is only just a fairly quick look at the figures in actually come forward to those comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you indeed for your comprehensive attention to the report, which I haven't had the opportunity to do yet. James, have you got all those queries?
I've got the queries. I'm going to, Nikki, do you want to come in the first instance and just provide the technical response, and I'll cover off anything beyond that?
Yes, thank you, James. So in relation to the dedicated schools grant and the 2.2 million kind of deficit adjustment, I'd suggest if you were to look at, well, it's note 29 in the accounts. Sorry, my page numbers are different to yours because I get a different pack, so I don't want to direct you to an incorrect page number.
Section 29, unusable reserves, is that what you're asking?
Unusable reserves. There's a note in there which refers to the dedicated schools grant adjustment account, and in 2021 some new regulations were laid in relation to the treatment of any deficit or surplus in relation to the dedicated schools grant, and it meant for this year any deficit that had arisen, even including any deficit as of the 1920, was transferred to this unusable reserve, and really it's then ring fenced to be kind of recovered against kind of dedicated schools grant income in future years. So in that note you'll see that there was a deficit transferred of 2.2 million in the opening balance. Some of that has been recovered in 2021 through the year, leaving a closing deficit of 659,000.
Is that it? Is that one? Yeah, that's fine. That could be your question, Roger. Okay. Do you want to move on to the next one, Nikki?
The next one in relation to the movement of kind of our net equity position, I think that might be a question slightly better for Neil in relation to the investment valuations, but if you want me to pick up the shopping centre query in relation to the I think you referring to maybe note 17, the long-term unquoted equity investment note, where it refers to some, in there it refers to some purchases of 3.4 million for Shrewsbury retail unit trusts. So that will cover some of the capital works that were done to the shopping centres while the properties were held in the unit trust. Any capital expenditure that's happened on them since the 1st of February onwards will have been part of the capital programme and will have just gone through our property, plant and equipment note. So some of the capital expenditure will be as part of that 3.4 million that's in note 17. We've then got a figure of a revaluation of 8.5 million. Now, that is the revaluation not only on kind of the value of the PP&E element, so the actual property value, but any movements in debtors and creditors, because it was classed as an investment. So it's not just the valuation of the property movement that will be in that figure. And then there's a 14.7 million, which is the transfer of investment. So that was the value that was held in the trusts as at 31st of January. And at that point, when we brought them back in onto the UK financial markets, we then transferred them across to PP&E. But there will been some debtors and creditors and cash that was held by the trusts at that point. So that 14.7 million will have been kind of transferred to the different areas in the balance sheet. Now it's under our full kind of ownership.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I need to think about that.
Don't we all?
Just very simply, we've got a value which is held as a unit trust, which includes kind of everything. You just get single figures there. And then, so when that figure comes out, we separate out all the income and expenditure and cash and everything that was within that figure. And then there's the valuation element. So the valuation element that you'd have seen, you won't be able to translate back to the numbers in here because this was the unit trust valuation, and that was onshored in February. So it's a difficult equation. We can provide you with more detail on that, but rest assured, if we provide you that detail, it will come back to the figures that were released. So, okay.
Through Jeff, I have no doubt that the figures will balance. It's just trying to understand where and how they equate to each other.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, I'm sure, like you, that their figures will balance, but trying to balance them as individuals stresses again how much we need to rely on those whom we employ with the relevant expertise. Anything else on the state?
One last comment.
Oh, sorry, yeah, come in now.
No, one last comment, and I think it shows what has been the effect, is in the collection fund, which is in section 8, I see the non-domestic rate income went down by 50%. And I think that is very prevalent on how businesses have been affected, I think, during the COVID, if I've read that correctly.
Yeah, and again, if you need the technical detail, you can take you through this, but yeah, fundamentally, the simple answer to that was lots and lots of businesses last year were given rate relief, and therefore we would normally collect in £80 million worth of business rates. If businesses are told not to pay because they get relief, we don't collect in that 80 million. It's split roughly 50-50. 1% goes to the fire service, but it's roughly 50-50 between us and the government. So the government had to take that reduction for their part on the chin, but from our part, our 40 million, we still needed that missing 20 million. So the government not only had to take the reduction on their side, but they also had to give us a grant for the amount that was missing. So that's reflected in the accounts. That's a simple answer. If you want something more technical, then I'm sure Nikki would love to take you through that. So it's a favourite subject, the collection fund. Neil, did you want to come in on Councillor Evans' other question?
Yes, I think it was just referring to the movement on the equity on the balance sheet. So yeah, I think as we've covered previously, a large part of this was the fall in the valuation of the assets following the revaluations this year and the new criteria on which they were based. I think, Nikki, as well, there was a movement in the pension reserve, was there as well?
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, there was a movement in the pension reserve.
I think they were the two big figures that moved.
Okay. Unless there are any other queries, I think are we in a position to approve the draft statement of accounts, or are we going to wait to approve them till after we've had our next meeting?
Well, what I would suggest is that if you're comfortable with the information that you've had and you've had the opportunity, Toyne's tried to take you through the analytical review as far as we can. You've had the opportunity to see the accounts. If you're comfortable to approve them as they stand, regardless, I will be signing the accounts off later today, and we'll be passing those across to Grant Thornton. as I say, there is still the opportunity for any questions to be raised over the next couple of weeks, which we will come back to. But that's more about just getting your understanding that there is nothing that Audit Committee, whether you agree to approve them or not, they will still be going out to Grant Thornton. I will still be, you can rest assured, from my point of view, I consider them to be a true and fair view of the council's accounts. It's just unfortunate that you haven't had enough time to really review and consider some of those elements in a little bit more detail.
Well, I think at the moment then we will note the accounts, we'll receive and note the statement of accounts, and we will give our approval to them, but hopefully when we get them at our next meeting.
Chair, if I've understood that, we're given an overview here of what the accounts are, and we've got opportunities to ask questions of that overview. I don't think we'd have the opportunity, or would we, to reject them because you'd carry on with them anyway, and Grant Thornton would then audit them in any event. So this, if I've got this correct, what we're doing here, as Councillor Evans has, been very erudite in doing, is actually looking at the accounts and asking questions as to what they mean for us. And even if we get an answer which we either don't understand or, quite frankly, don't agree with, if we have that technical skill, maybe you do, Roger. It's kind of it's sort of irrelevant anyway, because you're going to put them forward and Grant Thornton are going to complete their audit. So sorry, Brian, I think you're probably right just to note what's been presented.
If I may, Chair, the recommendation reads to receive and comment on the draft statement of account. So from that point of view, it's receiving and commenting. That it's not asking you to formally approve anything as it sounds.
Sorry about that, was a bit pedantic, but
I want to leave something for us to do at our next meeting. That's why we'll hopefully approve it, since we've already received, noted, the accounts today. So, do we agree then to note and receive the accounts? All in agreement. First Simon, secondly Nigel, and agreed. Thank you. Thank you for that, James. Thank you, Toyin, and other financial assistants for so much information. We shall all study the accounts with great interest over the next week or two. That was item 12. So item 13 is the external audit plan. And this is where we call upon a long-standing friend, Grant Patterson, to present the account to us. Grant was our audit lead for years when I was first chairman, back in the late noughties and the beginning of the teens, and went away to do other things within the company, and has now returned. And it's joyful that we can resume this friendship that goes back a long way, Grant.
Okay.
Right, you're on.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry.
Are we back to the original?
Yes, I was about to say, Chair. I'm now taking you back to the original pack.
Thank you. I beat you to it.
Well,
yeah, you have, yes.
It is item 13 on the original.
On the original.
Have we got a page number?
Huh?
Page.
217.
We're on page 207 now,
Yeah.
Which is the cover report for item 13.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for that introduction. I don't think I'm quite the prodigal son coming back. And to be quite clear for those listening, that I do maintain my independence of the council, and the reason I had to depart was I have to have a certain break away from you before I am allowed to come back again, just to maintain that independence. Probably just also, before I start off, just picking up on the final item, I think whilst Baron, whatever your monitoring officer might tell you, in terms of the accounts themselves, you don't have to formally approve them at this point. As in that sense, they have to be approved for publishing prior to the end of September, ideally, under any accounting record. So I think just noting them and commenting on them is appropriate at this point in time. There's no statutory requirement on you to approve them. And as you're hearing, James can sign them and pass them over to us without having formal approval. You're probably ahead of the curve in that sense in taking them early. Not every audit committee will receive the draft accounts ahead of that, depending on when they're produced. So in that sense, so what I'm going to do is take you through our audit plan for this year, and hopefully when I take you through that, you'll be able to see the themes actually tie into what you've already heard a lot through officers. And then Mary's going to take you through the informing the risk assessment, and then I'm going to come back very quickly with the pension fund audit plan at the end. So if I first of all sort of take you to page 213 in the pack, and big ticket, and what we do on that page is refer to what we say, so the big ticket items are all referred to on the key matters page. And as you've heard, COVID continues to feature heavily on the council's agenda, and if you have the opportunity to go through the accounts, if you look particularly at note 39, that lists out the council's revenue grant income. I think what we would say is, while accounting for grants is nothing new for the council, accounting for the number of additional grants you've had actually this year is new. There have been a range of packages made available which the councils have had to allocate or distribute. Now, whether or not you include those in your accounts is dependent on the nature of those grants provided, and therefore we make reference to it on that page as it's constituted as a significant amount of additional funding for the council this year, as well as a significant amount of work. So that's just to highlight that's probably an area of focus of the audit this year going forward. So if I then say, well, how are we going to respond to looking at those matters? So I'm going to move you on to significant risks, and they're based on pages 216 and 217. There are two presumed risks in all audits. One's that there's improper revenue recognition, and that includes expenditure in the public sector, and the other is a risk of management override of control. The latter of those is what we say non-rebuttable. I have to do some work on it. It's non-negotiable, if you like. And we set that out on page 217 of your pack, and how we propose to address that risk. And that's essentially the existence of that risk means we'll focus on subjective areas of the accounts, including where there are large and complicated estimates where management could circumvent normal controls in order to achieve an outcome. And that tends to be us looking at journals as well as your estimate policies. In respect to the risk of fraud in revenue recognition, we have concluded, as set out on page 216, that we can rebut that risk. But while we've rebutted it, I want to give you assurance that we will do a significant amount of work, and our proposed approach is set out on the right hand side of that page, with a particular focus on cut-off and elements like that. Our next significant risk, and that's building upon what you've heard over in the accounts, is around what we've put down as valuation of land and buildings and natural property, plant and equipment, which, as with the pensions liability that follows, involves estimates and judgments, and therefore is a focus of our work. And the key things we're looking at there will be the underlying data that's gone to the valuer and the assumptions used by the valuer to get to those valuations. As part of that, we will be appointing our own expert to assist us in that, similar to last year. And then the final significant risk is around the valuation of a net pension fund liability. And you've heard that has moved significantly again this year, primarily due to sort of changes in some of the key assumptions around discount rates, etc. at the year end. You're not unusual in that. You'll well, I recognise a lot of new members actually on the committee, so you're probably not as used to looking at this now, but generally this risk has been on a number of our audit plans for a number of years. But the ante has sort of been raised again this year because of there's some revised estimates or auditing standards around auditing estimates this year, and there's more information on that later in the plan. I think probably just to note, you'll note that those significant risks do apply to both the council and the group. And as noted on page 215 of your pack, we have highlighted that the council's group structure, and you've heard about that. You've got STAR and your property company as well as other elements of that. None of those are individually significant, but probably just to remind members that we are, as Grant Thornton, are the auditors of STAR. We currently don't propose to issue sort of group instructions as part of that work, but we'll review the audited accounts and undertake analytical review. Probably just to highlight to you on page 219, other risks. We mentioned two other risks on page 219. They're not flagged as significant as we consider that the risk and misstatement is lower than that for significant risks. But the first is in relation to operating expenses. And that highlights a focus on occurrence of expenditure and completeness of payables. And that's ensuring that the council has accounted correctly for everything that it owes, excuse me, at the 31st of March. But that expenditure also occurred isn't being overstated. And the second committee picks up, so you've heard about the onshoring of the JPUT, where we will be looking at the accounting entries around that. In terms of other matters, they're set out on page 223, and that's probably just a summary of the public sector responsibilities. We do need to check, as you've heard earlier, the consistency of the narrative report, also the AGS, which is on today's agenda. And we reviewed the AGS against requirements for compliance, perform work in relation to the, and also we undertake work in relation to whole of government accounts. So we've all designed programs for work in respect of all the material balances and disclosures in the accounts, and that's both quantitative and qualitative. All of that work, however, is driven by materiality, and we've determined what that is on page 224. Levels is actually similar to last year. But as the audit progresses, if we need to revisit materiality, we will. Once we've received the accounts from James, we'll then go through and look at that again. If there are any changes, report those to you in our audit findings report. So that's really the approach to the accounts overall. As sure as you're aware, there's two prongs to our two approaches to these. Our approach is two-pronged. There's one is the statement of accounts. The second is the value for money opinion. So secondly, on that, looking at value for money, as discussed previously, I think, although I recognise there are new members, there's a change to the value for money approach this year. We no longer give a binary conclusion on whether an organisation has or hasn't achieved value for money, but we are still required to consider whether there are proper arrangements in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And we're going to do that by commentary across the three areas set out on page 225, which is financial sustainability, governance and economy, the three E's, economy, efficiency and effectiveness. We set out on page 226 where we think the risk of significant weakness might lie. The first of those in relation to financial sustainability, and that again links into comments that both within your AGS and members made earlier around the structural deficit that you've highlighted within the AGS. And that's primarily saying that we don't necessarily think that there is a significant weakness, but we need to put it as an area of focus. And we'll be looking at that, especially given the levels of funding of the council and the uncertainty going forward. The councils at the moment are having to operate on an annual basis, effectively in the funding from government, and I think there is a hope that will go to a 3-year settlement at some point. So we will be focusing on that area in relation to of value for money. And the second, actually, again picked up I think by one of the members earlier in the meeting, was around looking at the highways contract governance, and that's picked up. I think internal audit did look at that as well. But again, it's an area that you flagged as one of its priorities in terms of value for money and improving governance arrangements and that. So we'll review the arrangements and the progress you've made in the year. Finally, just bringing it all together in terms of fees and independence, we are proposing increased fees again this year, and hopefully the analysis on page 229 helps to explain why and where those increases come from. As noted in the report itself, we are appointed by PSAA Limited, or Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, and they set out and approve any final fee, so it is subject to their agreement. But we do set these out for transparency here, so you can see that's what we think it will cost. And again, this is all building upon the increased expectations of auditors, also falling out of the Redmond review. I'm aware that MHCLG is making funding available, is consulting on how that might get split up to meet the additional costs of audit. So we've outlined the fees there, but I'm happy to take questions on them. And also on page 230, we've highlighted the other work that we do for the council around grant claims, and those are standard pieces of work that's typical for external auditor of a local authority. And like I say, as mentioned we also mentioned there that we are the appointed auditor of the STAR subsidiary. And I was going to sort of stop there on the plan and take any questions.
Thank you, Grant. I've just a couple of points I'd like to make before I invite members to comment if they wish. First of all, the audit plan, can you explain to us, this is a plan of what you're going to do. Will you be coming back at each meeting telling you how the plan has advanced, how you're
meeting the requirements of the plan you set before us? Or will you be waiting till the end of the year and reporting on the plan as a whole?
In normal circumstances, we would do regular progress reports, but given where we are now, I think what you'll receive hopefully in September will be the audit findings report. So there won't be interim reporting between committee meetings, but normally we'd do that, because normally what we'd be looking to do probably in a normal audit cycle that we've been affected by the pandemic in some ways to the council, we'd probably normally bring this plan to you in, say, March, something like that, the March committee. There'll be an progress report in June, or in the June committee, and then the audit findings report will go into September as a normal, I suppose, cycle. So the answer is we would bring a progress report, but I think the next time we'll see you will be hopefully when we finalise the audit, so it'll be drawn together there. However, I will say that that will cover the statement of accounts audit. In terms of value for money, we will undertake sufficient work to enable us to bring a conclusion on the opinion, but as part of value for money, we have to produce an annual auditor's report, which effectively replaces what you might have seen in the annual audit letter in the past. And we have 3 months from the date of giving the opinion to produce that. So you will get a further report from us after our audit findings report that will cover the value for money in more detail from that. So that will be towards the end of the calendar year. So.
Thank you. My second point is to draw your attention to an omission from the table of audit fees. And the omission relates to a reduction in the fee due to the fact that you have no travelling time to include and are able to no travel expenses since you're working remotely all the time. Can we hope for a reduction of 5 or 10% on the fee due to those beneficial situation you find yourself in?
Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to offer that reduction in that sense. I mean, the fees are there for how we will undertake the audit. I mean, there was a hope actually that I would imagine maybe not in the next couple of months, but after that we will return to being able to have site visits. I'm not saying we'll be back in the same way that we were, that we will come and sort of camp in the audit or in the building for 4 or 5 weeks. We'll be discussing that with officers. But yes, I mean, I don't disagree that clearly we are reduced travelling costs and happens like that. They've always been absorbed in audit fees. In the commercial sector, they normally be charged separately. But I think we've put that into, when these audit fees are put together, they've been balanced in terms of picking up those costs that might come back in against the requirements of the need to meet the Financial Reporting Council's expectations, I suppose, on audit standards and audit quality. So I can't offer you a reduction of that level based upon that, but it does factor into the overall fee levels that we've put forward today.
Thank you. You can speculate as to whether or not someone put me up to that question, but my lips are sealed as to. Right, we'll move on. Members' questions. Anything one wants to say to Grant or Mary on this plan? If not, we receive the plan. Shall we agree to receive the plan, members? Proposed Roger, seconded by Simon. And all in favour, thank you. Right, now you're got on again, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to pass over to Mary now, who's going to take you through the informing the audit risk assessment.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is the key document which historically is presented alongside the audit plan. So just to give you a brief overview, I realise it's quite a hefty report. So as part of our audit planning process, there are a number of key areas where we have detailed discussions with management, review documentation that we provided, and that builds up our audit plan and our risk assessment. So this report covers those key areas where we've had those discussions. So, for example, key events that have happened within the financial year, or even prior to that could have a potential impact on this year. Fraud, laws and regulations, claims, litigation, related parties, and in particular this year with the changes to ISO 540 is the change in accounting estimates as well, where we have to do more extended procedures around that. So the responses within this report have been provided by management in relation to those areas, and that's where they're summarised. So it's presented here to Audit Committee as a means of a three-way communication. So that's between yourselves as those charged with governance, management, and us as auditors as well. So what I wasn't going to do is go into the report in detail. I'll take that as read, but it's the opportunity really to gather your comments or responses, or just to confirm really that the responses within the report that management have given us are in line with this committee's understanding or the wider understanding of the council. I wasn't going to say any more, so quite short and sweet, but just to give you the opportunity to comment on the report and for me to take any questions. Thank you.
The report seems fairly straightforward. I don't know if members, I have no questions. Members, all happy with the report? We note it then. Read. Simon and Caroline are all agreed. Thank you. We now have again Grant Thornton to talk to us about third line assurance, external audit, Shropshire Council Pension Fund Audit Plan. And this is page.
Yeah, this is page 271 of the pack, Chair. So back with me now. I'm also the appointed auditor for the pension fund, and as James mentioned earlier, the pension fund accounts are contained within the statement of accounts, but the pensions committee takes responsibility for reviewing those, because ultimately they then do form part of the pension fund annual report that gets published sort of separately to the statement of accounts. But however, in terms of overall responsibility, in terms of legislations put together, the pension accounts form part of the council's accounts as the administering authority, and therefore ultimately will form part of the assurance that as audit committee that you'll be giving either yourselves or to full council, that the accounts can be published. Therefore, what we're bringing here, we've already taken this audit plan through pension committee, so we're really just tabling this here for information in terms of this is the work we propose, or we actually are on site now undertaking this work as part of the pension fund accounts. So I wasn't going to go through it in detail. It's really there for information for your purposes about this is the work we're undertaking on the pension fund. We're reporting separately to pensions committee, and I'm picking up on one of those things we're going to have a conversation with, I think, with officers outside of it, is I think actually the pension committee is on the 17th of September, which is after the next audit committee, so we'll just have to have a quick discussion around how that would affect the reporting lines going forward. But I think we'll resolve that and discuss that with you outside of the meeting cycle. But I'm happy to take any questions you have on this in terms of the audit approach. Primarily for pension fund, a lot of our work is focused on the harder to value investments, level 3 investments, and that's one of the changes that James was alluding to that came in late in the accounts process. But I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank Grant. Since 60% of the audit committee are also members of the pensions committee, there's a certain incestuous relationship between the audit and pensions. So which will, three of us on this committee will hear this at the pensions committee, and you will take us through it as necessary. Yeah. If anybody on the this committee has information that they require about that at the next meeting, I take it. So you're saying you're going to present this at the next audit committee meeting?
It's already been through that. We've already taken the plan to pensions committee. The last pensions committee, it's already been through, I believe, through the pensions committee. I've already taken it once. So I think it was just before the elections or just after the elections, I think. So
it's 25th of February.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So we just note the report now.
It's a note, and then what we will bring us alongside this is the audit findings report will go to the pensions committee, but it will also come to yourselves. Basically, I mean, I will need to talk to James about the way the actual alignment of government's works, because I think the committee dates don't quite align in that sense, because normally what you'd probably expect is pension committee recommending to yourselves adoption, I would suspect, and then so you wouldn't have to do the work again, basically. So you'll be taking assurance from the pension committee, but as 60% of you are there already, then hopefully that'll be relatively straightforward.
I hope so. Okay, so we note the audit plan, the pension fund audit plan as it's put before us. Agreed? Thank you. We now come, it's not the last item, though it may look it to be so. The next meeting of the Audit Committee will be held on Thursday the 16th of September at 10 AM, as you already knew. And now I am obliged to put before you the following resolution. To resolve that in accordance with the provision of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, Section 5 of the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, brackets, meetings and access to information, brackets, England, bracket, regulations and paragraphs 2, 3 and 7 of the Council's access to information rules, that public and press be excluded during consideration of the following items. Is that agreed? Moved by Carolyn, seconded by Simon, and all agree. Thank you. So we now cease to be live, I take it. Sorry?
Just give it a second. Michelle, I confirm it a second.
We're waiting a God.